Whoever decided 15 minutes of practice would be enough this weekend nailed it. I'm Matt Faulkner, and this is Overtime. This week at Fontana, we saw a lot of spins. We saw a lot of challenges with guys trying to control their cars, trying to keep their cars on the track, trying to manage the bumps. With all the challenges Fontana has in and of itself, seams, bumps, new car, we saw a lot of struggles with guys trying to control their cars, and today we'd like to talk about why that was the case. There's 3 reasons that I think the next-gen cars are much harder to drive and much more challenging than the Gen 6 car. The first reason is suspension rigidity. The old cars used to have 4 standard springs, and then up front they had 2 springs we called bump springs that would help keep the splitter on the track where it needed to be. So the front end in the old car was rigid, the back end was usually not. The next-gen car has hard stops on all 4 corners, so at some point you could be on 4 hard stops with an ultimately very rigid car. Now when you're on a smooth track, that's not that big of a deal, but when you're on a rough track with bumps like Fontana, it's a rough ride. And I think a lot of guys got caught up in hitting bumps at times where their car was a challenge to handle anyway, and the bump made them lose control. Not to mention it was their first time really driving these cars hard in race conditions at a bumpy track. That combined with the rigidity of the car caused a lot of mayhem out there. The second reason the next-gen car is such a challenge to drive is aerodynamics. The Gen 6 car had a body that was asymmetrical, as in it was designed to favor turning left. The next-gen car is not. It has a symmetrical body like you'd buy on a street car from the dealership. So when the Gen 6 car would start to get sideways, air would push on the right rear quarter panel and help steer the car back straight again. The next-gen car doesn't have that feature. In fact, the next-gen car makes less rear side force the more it spins. So when the next-gen car starts to spin, it gets even harder to drive and starts to spin more, which is a big challenge, and which makes the drivers have to slow the car down way more before they can save it. We saw a few saves this weekend, but those saves required a lot of deceleration before the drivers were actually able to bring them back straight again. The third reason the next-gen car is such a challenge to drive is the diffuser and underfloor. Now on a Gen 6 car, there was no underfloor diffuser. As you can see, it was just raw componentry, exhaust, steering, oil pan, rear axle, all exposed, which even though we studied many ways to make this aerodynamically efficient, it is not near as aerodynamically efficient as an underwing. So an underwing is a carbon fiber floor. We all saw it when Harrison Burton flipped over at Daytona, that creates downforce. It creates its most downforce when the car is pointing straight. So as we saw so many times at Fontana when guys would start to spin, they would lose control of their car, and the reason for that is that the diffuser, when it's not pointed straight anymore, when it starts to rotate and the diffuser skirts on the back aren't straight anymore, the whole floor of the car loses its ability to create downforce and makes it even harder to drive than before you started spinning. Those 3 factors, suspension rigidity, bumps at Fontana, no rear side force, and the underwing or diffuser not working anymore once the car starts to spin, made the cars extremely difficult to save this week at Fontana, and we saw that with all the cautions that we had and all of the destroyed cars that there were. This shouldn't show up as much at smooth tracks, and it shouldn't show up as much at super speedways where you're not at the limit of the tires like Daytona. But Fontana, especially being the first time the drivers had come to that track and come to a track as bumpy and big and at the limit of the tires as it was, showed pretty much every challenge that this car will face, and hopefully it'll only get easier for the drivers from here on out.